Why would Jesus curse a tree for not having fruit when it wasn't even the season for figs? What did the tree actually do wrong? Was it just a tree, or was it something more? Why would a moment like this appear in the middle of such a critical time, just days before Jerusalem, just before everything reaches its peak? Why would Jesus approach the tree expecting fruit if the text itself says it was not the season? Was he looking for something specific, something beyond what appears on the surface? And why, after finding nothing, does he respond with a curse, a response so final that the tree withers completely from the roots? What kind of moment is this? A reaction? A lesson? A warning? And why do the disciples witness it, but only understand it later? What is being revealed here that is not immediately visible? Because this is not just about a tree, it is about expectation, about appearance, about something that looks alive but produces nothing. So the question is not just, why did Jesus curse the fig tree? The real question is, what was the tree representing that made this moment necessary? The moment unfolds quietly. There is no crowd reacting, no confrontation, no immediate explanation. Jesus is walking with his disciples, moving toward Jerusalem during one of the most significant periods recorded in the Gospels. The tension in the narrative is already building. Everything is moving towards something greater, and yet in the middle of this movement, something unexpected happens. The text tells us that Jesus is hungry. It is a simple detail, human, ordinary. He sees a fig tree in the distance, covered in leaves. From a distance, the tree appears full, alive, promising. It draws attention not because it is unusual, but because it looks exactly as it should. So he approaches it, not randomly, not without purpose. He comes to it expecting to find something, fruit. But when he reaches the tree, there is nothing, only leaves. And then the text introduces a detail that complicates everything. It was not the season for figs. This changes how the moment is perceived, because now the question becomes unavoidable. Why approach the tree expecting fruit if it was not the time for fruit? Was something else being observed? Something beyond the natural expectation? Something beyond the surface? Because what follows is not a simple reaction. Jesus does not walk away. He does not ignore it. He speaks to the tree. A direct statement, final. No one will ever eat fruit from you again. There is no explanation given in that moment, no interpretation, no clarification to the disciples, just the statement. And the text adds a subtle but important detail, and his disciples heard it, which means this moment was not private. It was meant to be witnessed, but not yet understood. The narrative does not pause to explain. Instead, it continues. Jesus enters Jerusalem. He goes into the temple, and there another scene unfolds. A scene filled with intensity, tables overturned, voices raised, a system confronted, a space that was meant for one purpose, being used for another. The connection between these two moments is not explained immediately, but they are placed side by side, the tree and the temple, both appearing one way on the outside, both being approached with expectation, both revealing something different upon closer inspection. And yet at this point, the disciples do not respond. They do not question. They simply continue. It is only later, when they pass by the same place again, that everything begins to shift. The tree is no longer the same. It has withered completely, from the roots, not gradually, not partially, but entirely. And that is when the question finally emerges. A question that reflects the tension that has been building since the moment Jesus spoke. How did this happen? What does this mean? Because this is not just an isolated event. It is placed intentionally, between movement, between actions, between moments that carry significance. And nothing in the text suggests that it is random. The hunger, the approach, the absence of fruit, the statement, the silence, the temple, the return, the withering. Every part is connected, but the connection is not immediately explained. And that is what creates the mystery, because what appears simple on the surface begins to reveal something deeper the moment it is examined more closely. And the question remains, was this really about a tree? Or was the tree revealing something else, something already present, but not yet fully seen? The account of the fig tree appears within a very specific moment in the Gospel of Mark. It is not isolated. It is not placed randomly. It is positioned during the final days of Jesus' public ministry as he approaches Jerusalem. This timing is critical because everything in this section of the narrative carries increasing weight. The journey toward Jerusalem is not just geographical, it is purposeful, intentional. Each step moves closer to events that will define the entire message of the gospel. In Mark chapter 11, Jesus enters Jerusalem. This moment is often associated with expectation. Crowds are present. There is recognition. There is anticipation. But beneath that surface, there is also tension. Because what appears outwardly is not always aligned with what is inwardly true. And it is in this environment that the fig tree appears. The text presents a simple sequence. Jesus sees the tree from a distance. It is in leaf. This detail is not accidental. In the natural cycle of the fig tree, leaves can suggest the presence of early fruit, not the full harvest, but signs that something should be there. From a distance, the tree communicates promise. It suggests productivity. It creates expectation. This explains why Jesus approaches it. The expectation is not arbitrary. It is based on what is visible, but when he arrives, there is nothing. Only leaves. And again, the text introduces the detail. It was not the season for figs. This does not remove the tension. It increases it. Because now the reader is left holding two realities at the same time. The appearance suggested fruit, but the season did not require it. And yet, Jesus responds, not with observation, but with a statement. A declaration spoken directly to the tree. This moment becomes even more significant when placed alongside what immediately follows. After speaking to the fig tree, Jesus enters the temple, and the tone changes. The quiet moment with the tree is replaced by visible action. He overturns tables. He drives out those who are buying and selling. He stops the movement of goods through the temple, and he speaks again. But this time, the words are directed at people. My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers. The narrative structure is intentional. The fig tree, then the temple, then later the return to the fig tree. This creates a pattern. The first moment introduces the image. The second reveals confrontation. The third brings visible consequence. But at this point in the story, the explanation is still not given. The disciples witness everything. They hear the words spoken to the tree. They see what happens in the temple, but they do not yet connect the meaning. And this is where the narrative invites the reader to slow down, because nothing in this sequence is presented as accidental. The placement, the repetition, the timing, all of it suggests that something is being communicated beneath the surface. And if you follow the structure carefully, you begin to notice that the story is not rushing to explain itself. It allows the tension to build. It allows the questions to remain. Because understanding does not come immediately. It comes after observation, after reflection, after seeing the full sequence unfold. And that is exactly how this moment is meant to be experienced, not as a quick answer, but as something that reveals its meaning only when every detail is considered. So, as the narrative continues, the question is not only what happened, but why it was placed exactly here, between approach, confrontation, and consequence. And if you are paying attention to how these moments connect, you are already beginning to see that this is not just a story. It is a pattern, one that only becomes clear when everything is seen together. The sequence of events in Mark chapter 11 unfolds with precision. Each detail is recorded in a way that invites attention, not only to what happens, but to how it happens. The text begins by stating that on the following day, as Jesus and his disciples were leaving Bethany, he was hungry. This is the first detail, simple, direct. There is no symbolic explanation given at this point. It is presented as a real condition. From that place of hunger, the next action follows. Seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. The wording is important. He sees the tree from a distance, and what he sees is not fruit. He sees leaves. The leaves are what draw his attention. They create the expectation. They suggest that something might be present, so he approaches the tree. The text then describes what happens when he reaches it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves. This statement is direct. There is no partial result, no small fruit, no early sign, nothing, only leaves. And immediately after this, the text adds, because it was not the season for figs. This detail remains within the narrative. It is not separated. It is included in the same sentence, which means it is meant to be read together with what was just observed. The absence of fruit is stated, and the timing is stated, but no explanation is given for how these two relate. The text does not resolve this tension at this point. Instead, it moves forward. Then he said to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." This is the first spoken response. It is not a question. It is not a reflection. It is a declaration, and it is directed at the tree. The language is final. There is no indication of reversal, no condition attached. The statement stands as it is, and immediately after this, the text records, "and his disciples heard it." This detail confirms that the moment is not isolated. It is witnessed. It is meant to be remembered. But still, no explanation is given. The narrative continues without pause. Jesus enters Jerusalem. He goes into the temple. And there, the tone changes. He begins to drive out those who were buying and selling. He overturns the tables of the money changers. He overturns the seats of those selling doves. And the text adds another detail. He would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. This indicates control over movement, not just a reaction, a deliberate interruption. Then he teaches, "My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers." This statement introduces a contrast, what the temple is meant to be and what it has become. Again, no direct connection is made to the fig tree at this point, but the sequence continues. The narrative moves forward. Time passes, and then the text returns to the earlier moment. "In the morning, as they went along, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots." This is the first visible result of what was spoken earlier. The description is specific. Withered, from the roots, not partially damaged, not externally affected, but entirely affected at its source. The cause is not described in natural terms. No process is explained, only the result is presented. Then Peter remembers. "Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered." This is the first time the word cursed is used in reference to what happened. The text itself did not initially use that word when Jesus spoke, but now the disciples interpret the statement in that way. Peter identifies the connection between the words spoken and the condition of the tree. At this point, the sequence is complete. The approach, the observation, the declaration, the silence, the temple, the return, the result. Every part is recorded, but still no direct explanation has been given. The text presents the event in full, but it leaves the meaning to be considered, and it is only after this moment that Jesus begins to speak again, not about the tree directly, but about something that extends beyond it. And that is where the shift begins. The account of the fig tree in Mark chapter 11 presents a sequence that is clearly described, yet not immediately explained. The text records what Jesus does, what the disciples observe, and how the events unfold over time. However, the meaning behind these actions is not explicitly stated within the narrative itself. Before considering any interpretation, it is necessary to reaffirm what the text directly establishes. Jesus is hungry. He sees a fig tree in leaf from a distance. He approaches it expecting to find fruit. He finds nothing but leaves. The text states that it was not the season for figs. Jesus speaks a declaration to the tree. The disciples hear it. Jesus then enters the temple and confronts what is happening there. Later, the tree is found withered from the roots. The disciples recognize the connection between the words spoken and the condition of the tree. These elements form the complete textual foundation. From this foundation, several observations can be made without moving beyond what is written. One observation is the relationship between appearance and expectation. The tree is described as being in leaf, which creates a visible impression of life and potential fruitfulness. This visible condition leads to an action. Jesus approaches the tree to find fruit. The expectation is therefore connected to what is seen. Another observation is the absence of fruit despite the presence of leaves. The text does not describe partial fruit or undeveloped fruit. It states clearly that nothing was found but leaves. This creates a contrast between outward appearance and actual condition. A further observation concerns the statement about timing. The text includes the detail that it was not the season for figs. This information is presented without explanation, which means the reader must hold this detail alongside the expectation and the outcome. The text does not resolve the tension between these elements at this point. Another observation is the nature of Jesus' response. His words are direct and final. There is no dialogue, no questioning, and no delay. The statement is spoken, and the narrative moves forward without commentary. The inclusion of the temple event immediately after this moment is also significant. The narrative places these two scenes together, creating a sequence: the fig tree, then the temple, then the return to the fig tree. While the text does not explicitly state the connection, the structure itself suggests that these events are meant to be considered together. With these observations established, possible interpretations can be considered carefully. One possible interpretation is that the fig tree represents something beyond itself. This interpretation arises from the placement of the event alongside the temple scene. Both involve an approach, an expectation, and a response. However, while the structure suggests a relationship, the text does not explicitly define the tree as a symbol, and therefore this interpretation must remain a consideration rather than a stated conclusion. Another possible interpretation focuses on the concept of appearance without result. The tree appears to be alive and productive because of its leaves, yet it produces nothing. This may suggest a contrast between outward condition and actual outcome. However, the text does not explicitly state that this is the intended meaning, and therefore this must be understood as an inference based on observation rather than a direct statement. A further interpretation considers the role of timing. The mention that it was not the season for figs introduces complexity into the expectation of fruit. Some may interpret this as indicating that the expectation was not based on natural timing alone. Others may understand it as part of the tension within the narrative. The text itself does not explain why this detail is included, which means any conclusion regarding its purpose must remain cautious. Another possible interpretation involves the connection between the spoken word and the visible result. The tree withers after the statement is made, and the disciples recognize this connection. This may suggest a relationship between what is spoken and what occurs. However, the text does not expand on this relationship within these verses, and therefore it must be observed without being extended beyond what is stated. The temple event also introduces interpretive possibilities. The actions taken there involve confrontation, correction, and a statement about what the temple is meant to be versus what it has become. The placement of this event between the two references to the fig tree may suggest a thematic connection. However, since the text does not explicitly state that connection, it remains an observation rather than a defined interpretation. Because of this, the passage must be approached with restraint. It presents a sequence, it presents details, it presents outcomes, but it does not immediately provide a full explanation of meaning. The reader is given the events, the structure, the tension, and the repetition, but the interpretation is not delivered at this stage. Instead, the narrative continues, and it is only in what follows that the purpose of these moments begins to take clearer form. By the time the narrative reaches its conclusion, the tension that has been building throughout the sequence begins to resolve, not through a direct explanation given in a single sentence, but through the way the events are connected. The fig tree is approached because it appears to have something to offer. It is full of leaves. From a distance, it gives the impression of life, of readiness, of fruitfulness. But when examined closely, there is nothing, only appearance, no substance. And this is where the connection becomes unavoidable, because immediately after this moment, Jesus enters the temple, a place that, like the tree, carries an appearance, structure, activity, movement. Everything on the surface suggests purpose. But what he finds inside does not match what the temple was meant to be. Instead of a house of prayer, it has become something else, something misaligned. Something that, like the tree, presents one reality outwardly, but holds a different condition within. This is where the pattern reveals itself. The tree is not introduced randomly. It is placed before the temple for a reason, and it reappears after the temple for a reason. The structure itself explains the meaning. The tree becomes a visible illustration of something that is otherwise harder to see, something that can exist without being immediately recognized. The condition of appearing alive while producing nothing, and this brings clarity to the earlier tension. The statement that it was not the season for figs does not remove the expectation, because the expectation was not built on season alone. It was built on appearance. The leaves created a signal. They suggested readiness. They suggested that something should be present. And when that expectation is tested, nothing is found. This reveals a deeper principle. The issue is not simply the absence of fruit. It is the presence of appearance without reality. And that is why the response is not passive. It is decisive, because what appears to be one thing, but is not, cannot remain as it is. The withering of the tree from the roots reinforces this. The change is not external. It is not superficial. It reaches the source, which means the problem was never just what could be seen. It was something deeper, something foundational. And when that is addressed, the result is total. This also explains why the disciples do not understand immediately, because the moment is not designed to be understood instantly. It is designed to be seen, then connected, then realized. And when they see the tree again, completely withered, the question naturally arises, not just about how it happened, but about what it means. And this is where the reflection becomes personal. Because the pattern presented in the text does not remain limited to the tree or to the temple, it introduces a category that extends beyond both, the category of appearance, and the possibility that appearance can exist without alignment, without substance, without fruit. This shifts the focus from observation to examination, not of the tree, not of the temple, but of what they represent. Because the narrative does not simply show what happened, it reveals what can exist. Something that looks complete, but is not. Something that gives the impression of life, but produces nothing. And this is why the moment is placed where it is, at a point where everything is being revealed, where what is hidden is being exposed, where what appears is being tested, and where the difference between appearance and reality can no longer remain unnoticed. This is not about a tree being judged. It is about a condition being revealed. A condition that once seen cannot be ignored. And that is why this moment matters, because it does not end with the tree. It points beyond it to something deeper, something that requires more than appearance, something that requires fruit. By the end of this moment, the question that began with a tree is no longer about a tree, because what seemed like an isolated act reveals a pattern that exposes something deeper than what is visible. The fig tree looked alive. It carried the signs, the leaves, the appearance. Everything suggested that something should be there, but when it was examined closely, there was nothing. And that is where everything shifts. Because the issue was not simply the absence of fruit, it was the presence of appearance without reality. The temple reflected the same pattern, activity, structure, movement, everything in place, but something essential was missing. Something that could not be seen from a distance, something that only became clear when it was confronted. And this is why the response is so direct, so final, because when something presents itself as one thing, but is not, it cannot remain unchanged. The withering of the tree was not random, it was a revelation, a visible outcome of something that already existed. And that is what makes this moment uncomfortable. Because it is not distant, it is not abstract, it is not confined to a place or a time. It introduces a question that does not stay in the text. It moves beyond it, a question that every person must eventually face. Not about what is seen on the outside, but about what is actually present. Because it is possible to look complete and produce nothing, to appear aligned and yet be disconnected at the root. And that is the tension this moment leaves behind, not resolved easily, not dismissed quickly, but placed directly in front of the reader, because once this is seen, it cannot be unseen. If this message made you stop, if it made you reflect, or even question what you've always assumed, then take that seriously. And if you want to continue exploring Scripture in a way that reveals what is often overlooked, consider subscribing to the channel, because this moment does not stand alone. It is part of a sequence, and what comes next deepens it even further, because after this, Jesus begins to speak about something that connects directly to what was just revealed. Not about trees, not about temples, but about something that determines whether anything can truly produce fruit at all. And that leads to the next question: what actually makes something fruitful in the eyes of God? And that is where the next episode begins.